So it's 2026 and you've decided to learn a new language. And you thought, why not Spanish? That's a great language. They speak it here, they speak it here, they speak it there. They speak it everywhere, and it's not that hard of a language to learn, right?
Right, right.
As long as you don't make the same mistakes that I did. When I was trying to learn Spanish 5 years ago, it was my first time learning a language. I didn't have a proper method. I thought, well, I'll just start now and I'll just see how it goes. And well, starting is the right place to begin. You need to know what you're going to do. As long as you have a good idea of how you're going to learn a language, just don't make the same mistakes that I did. I wasn't spamming vocabulary. Languages are made of words. Languages are made of vocabulary. And if you want to learn a language to a good level, say you're learning Spanish to about B2 level, that's upper intermediate, and that's a great starting point. It's a great first objective to have in mind. And at B2 level, you're going to cover 90% of all of the things that you'll have a conversation with on a day-to-day basis. You cover a lot of vocabulary. But to get to B2 level, you actually don't need that many words. You only need around 4,000 words. And that might seem like a lot, but you're not going to learn this language in a week. You're going to learn it over the space of a year, maybe a year and a couple months. So if you start now, and if you start learning 10 words a day, by the end of a year, that's 3,560 new words that you've learned, and you're basically there. You're basically at that 4,000 word bookmark that you need to hit to be able to get to a high intermediate level. And of course, the other things are really important as well. You need to improve your comprehension of the language and your ability to just put the words together into speech. But the biggest mistake that I was making was just not getting enough words done. After about 6 to 8 months of my journey of learning Spanish, I looked back through my flashcard list where I'd written down every single word I wanted to revise, and I realized there were about 800 words in there. And 800 words is not enough to have a conversation with bloody anyone. And that was the biggest reason why I wasn't making as much progress as I'd expected. I'd been studying Spanish, and I've been studying it a lot, 2 to 3 hours, maybe 4 hours some days, every single day, for 8 months at that point. And I couldn't have conversations with people yet. And the problem was, I just didn't have enough words. And you might think, okay, well, 4,000 is loads of words. How on earth are you going to learn that? If you take a set of words, take 8, 10 words at the beginning of the day, and practice them 4 times throughout the day. You're going to practice them in the morning, see them for the first time, practice them at lunchtime, just make a couple sentences with them, practice them again at dinner and before bed. You can learn 10 words a day like it's nothing. You can breeze through more than that, I'm sure of it. 10 is a conservative bet. Especially because in Spanish, so many of the words are the same as English. Off the top of my head, I can think of over 1,000 words that are probably the same in Spanish and English. I think everybody who's done Spanish at some point in school knows the word station is estación in Spanish, and there are so many other similar words like this. Central, central, cartón, cable, all of these are just the same cognates as that you use in English, and they come up all the time. Carton, carton of milk. Cartón de leche. Cable, that's the same. Talking about cables all the time. One right here. And they just say the same thing, cable. You just have to put a little bit of a Spanish accent on and you're all the way there, and that's sorted. As long as you remember that the biggest thing when it comes to learning a language is getting down vocabulary so you can have these essential conversations that you're going to have with people once you start to speak that language, then you're going to fly through it a lot better than I did because I wasn't prioritizing vocabulary. And as soon as you start doing that, you're going to make much more progress than you think you will. The structure of Spanish is pretty much the same as English. So if you're learning words, you're going to get a lot further. The second biggest mistake I want to talk about is so obvious, especially these days. It's 2026. Why the are people still using Duolingo? Don't use Duolingo, please. I started this 5 years ago. In 2021, that AI wasn't even a thing. And I had a 200-day streak on Duolingo. Now, a 200-day streak isn't ages, but at the same time, if you're spending 20 minutes a day for 200 days, that's hours and hours and hours wasted when I could have been doing something useful. And I think at the time, I even realized how ineffective Duolingo was, but it's just a streak. It really wants, you just psychologically are addicted to doing the streak. If you want to practice your Spanish with a streak, write it down on a piece of paper on your wall how many days you've been doing it for in a row. Don't use Duolingo. You know Duolingo is ridiculous. I know it's ridiculous. It's 2026. If you're going to use an app to help you, use ChatGPT. Ask how are things spoken colloquially in this country. Is this sentence correct? What's a more natural way of saying the sentence? Why is it not written this way? Why is it written this way instead? Those are great questions to ask ChatGPT. You don't need to be spending hours a day memorizing Duolingo words. I have like 17 PDFs on my computer that will teach you more vocabulary in 6 minutes than the full Duolingo course would take you if you studied that front to back. Like, Duolingo does not teach you anything, and I don't think I need to say anything more about that. The next biggest mistake I made is something I knew I probably should have been doing, but I didn't realize how bad it was that I wasn't doing it. Reading. You just need to read a lot more than you think you do, especially once you're getting to that point where you're starting to feel comfortable with the language. You have a good base of vocabulary, but you need to make a lot more progress before you can sit here and have a monologue, or you can do a speech, or you can just sit here and chat with your friends in that language. With reading, the biggest benefit is that all the sentences are put together, grammatically correct, the structure's correct, and it's full of new words. Don't read them in your head. The point of reading is to read it out loud. It gets your brain used to the sound and the rhythm of the language. It gets your brain used to words that follow other words quite often, so that when you're speaking, you don't have to sit there and consciously think and consciously conjugate every single word that you're going to say in a sentence. They just kind of come out together. For example, if I'm speaking in English, I don't have to put all of my concentration into every single word I'm going to say. I start off thinking about what I want to say, and then it kind of goes. You just do it subconsciously. And that's what happens with all the languages you want to learn. That's what happens with Spanish when you start reading out loud. Take a book from the library, take a fiction book for young adults or, for kids, and just read all of it out loud, front to back. And your brain's going to get so much more used to it, and your tongue is going to get used to pronouncing all of the words, especially in more of a Spanish-sounding accent. The more that you sit and you think that you're practicing words by writing things down, you don't get any production out. You're learning to speak a language, not learning to read Spanish. Reading Spanish is important, but your goal, I'm sure, is to speak Spanish specifically. You need to say the words. Get a book, read it, out loud. Done. Plus, you're going to come across so many new words that you've never seen before, and it doesn't matter if you memorize all of them. In fact, you shouldn't memorize all of them. But the more that you see these words, the more that you're going to get familiar with seeing them, and you're going to understand the context they're used in, and it's going to help to build towards your passive vocabulary. You're going to have a bunch of words that you'll understand when you hear them, but you're not going to necessarily go to in speech. And that's perfectly fine. That's how all of our brains work in every language, and even in your native language, that's how it works. Reading is easily one of the best ways to pick this up. And when I went on to learn other languages, that's one of the first things I went to. A lot more reading. Okay, now my final tip probably sounds really obvious to people, but I made this mistake, and I also see loads of other people making this mistake. So maybe it's not as obvious as it seems. Once you learn a language, it seems so obvious that there's all these different dialects and how unique and separate they are. You don't mix, you don't have any crossover between a lot of dialects. There's a core vocabulary set which is the same in all of them, but there's specific slang words that will stick to one dialect. And you need to learn a dialect of Spanish that's close to where you live, or that's the one where you're going to be going to visit. If you live in Europe, learn Spanish from Spain. Then again, if you're living in America, why would you be learning Spanish from Spain? There is no point if learning Spanish from a country that you're not going to get to go to. You should learn Spanish from Mexico. You learn Mexican Spanish, or from Cuban dialect of Spanish. Use something that's more close to where you live. I mean, if you're from Europe, don't learn Mexican Spanish, even though it's the most common. You're not going to Mexico every week. You can take a flight on Ryanair for £30 so you can get to Spain, where they speak Spanish from Spain. They speak in their dialect. If you're from America, you don't want to sound like un madrileño hablando en español como si fuera de Madrid, con el tata. No se van a entender. Then there's no point in speaking in a way that's not going to be understood. Why would you use the slang words from Cuba when you're in Argentina? It doesn't make sense. Especially when you're starting out a language, you don't know what slang words they use in one country that you don't learn in another. For example, use ChatGPT, use any piece of AI, and ask what's the most common colloquial words that they use in Spanish from Spain, or Spanish from Argentina, or Spanish from Mexico. And those are the words that you need to be learning. When you're making flashcards as well, you can quickly go double check on ChatGPT, ask, is this a common word that they use in Spanish from Spain? Is it a word they use everywhere? Does it matter? Is it a specific dialect? There's loads of different words that you're going to use in Spanish. I mean, if you're learning Mexican Spanish and you use the word coger, you're going to have a very different reaction from if you use it in Spain. And depending on what you're trying to say, you need to know these different meanings of the words. It took me about 14 months to learn Spanish cover to cover, to learn it enough to be able to go to Spain and have conversations with Spanish people. You can do a lot better than that if you don't make the same mistakes that I did. Yeah, done. I guess sorted.